So please, let's start with Maxine Wolf.
Okay. I'm going to talk about the campaign to change the Centers for Disease Control definition, that's the CDC definition of AIDS, to include the symptoms seen in women, which was a 4-year campaign built up over time based on a broad range of tactics, experiences, and relationships. The CDC originally based their definition of AIDS on the symptoms of a small number of cases, mainly of gay men. Without descriptions of the ways the infection manifested itself in women's bodies, many who were infected did not even know they might be, nor did the healthcare workers who were seeing them. Women who knew they were seropositive and had a broad range of infections, but without an AIDS diagnosis, could not qualify for disability, could not access services, and research about their conditions and about the effects of existing medications on them was not being done. The New York Women's Caucus did not initially focus on the CDC definition, but the work we did formed the basis for that campaign. Throughout 1988, we simply had to focus on proving that women were getting infected, that heterosexual transmission existed and wasn't about sex workers infecting men. We had to educate the men in ACT UP as well as ourselves about all the issues affecting women. So in March 1989, we did a teach-in on women and AIDS for ACT UP New York. And for the teach-in, we created a Women and AIDS handbook. And my daughter's going to pass it around. I brought things. It was an organizing and educating tool. And it included descriptions of possible infections, the CDC definition and its issues, and lots more. And we made 1,500 photocopies. We typed it on one of those word processors that took forever, which were sent all over the US and the world. The initial members of the CDC Planning Committee were people who had formed a relationship with ACT UP Atlanta, Terri, particularly Linda Meredith and Chip Rowan, through actions at the Democratic conventions in Atlanta in 1988, July 1988, and in South Carolina in April of 1989. And later in 1989, Chip called, and he raised the issue of an anti-sodomy law demonstration in Atlanta. And we talked about doing 2 actions, one about the sodomy laws and another about the CDC definition. So from September to December 1989, we planned these actions. Some of us in ACT UP New York wrote a critique of the CDC definition of AIDS, its epidemiology, and policies. And the document was sent out to all of the existing ACT UPs and to AIDS service organizations around the country. And it became the basis for the background that got sent to the press. My daughter's going to hand those out too. Both Robin Howder and Lori Cotter did amazing media work. In November 1989, we did a teach-in for ACT UP members about the definition, and in December, members of ACT UP met with James Curran, then the head of HIV at AIDS at the CDC, about our demands, which of course he did not accept. So in January 1990, we did our first direct action at the CDC, organized in coalition with ACT UP Atlanta and with other ACT UPs in the ACT Now network, which had formed in 1988. It was here I first met Mary Lucy, an HIV lesbian from Los Angeles, as we sat on the steps outside the jail discussing her vaginal infections. There were arrests, but more importantly, we got really good coverage on the AP Wire detailing women's infections, as well as in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, in national and local gay papers. It was after this action that Terri came to ACT UP, heard us talking about women's infections and the CDC definition, and realized she could sue the SSA for denying benefits based on using the erroneous CDC definition. Risa Denenberg worked with Terri, going through medical records to list infections the women had, and Tracy Morgan compiled information about existing research which no one was acknowledging even existed. And if you're interested, Jenna Correa wrote a great book called The Invisible Epidemic that no one talks about either. Linda Meredith had moved and was now in ACT UP DC and organized the action in front of the Health and Human Services building in DC the day the lawsuit was filed. But more had happened before this action. In May and June of 1990, the dissemination of our critique and the media work led to articles about women's infections and the CDC definition in major mainstream newspapers. At the National Institutes of Health Action, there was an affinity group called the Invisible Women, as well as the Coasters Affinity Group, which took over the offices of Dan Hoth, who was then the head of the AIDS Clinical Trials Research Group, and put leaflets in every file folder detailing women's infections and the need for research. At the International AIDS Conference in San Francisco, there were several women's actions, plus Linda Meredith handed Dan Hoth a note telling him he better meet with us about a conference on women and HIV or people would take over his office again. So in July 1990, after all of this, plus several pressuring phone calls, women from ACT UP DC and ACT UP New York met with Tony Fauci, the head of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, along with Dan Hoth, and educated them about women and HIV and demanded a conference. We taped the meeting, transcribed it, and mailed it to other ACT UPs and to AIDS service organizations all over the country that we had been working with. Finally, in October 1990, the lawsuit was filed, and ACT UP DC organized the action at HHS. The theme was Dead But Not Disabled, and that's a poster that's going to go around. And many seropositive women from Life Force Women Fighting AIDS and ACE Out for women getting out of prison, the Community Health Project, and other AIDS service organizations we had been working with participated, including Katrina Haslett, Iris Dela Cruz, Phyllis Sharp, and Lydia Awadala. They did a speak out and a die-in front of the building. Both got great mainstream press coverage. Then Ted Weiss, who represented Greenwich Village in Congress, made a statement on the floor of the House, which got into the congressional record, and several other representatives wrote to the CDC supporting us. We continued organizing for the second CDC action, which was held on December 3rd, 1990, 6 weeks later. But before that, in November, 5 of us, Katrina, Tracy, Maggie Hasbrook, and Chip Rowan from ACT UP Atlanta, and myself met with Gary Noble, the Assistant Director of HIV/AIDS at the CDC, and his epidemiology staff, to present our information and demands. Their response? It would mess up their statistics and give middle-class women anxiety if they had a yeast infection and thought they had HIV. Katrina's response? I hold you responsible for the death of every woman I know from HIV, including myself. The transcript is being passed around. We also mailed that around the country. On December 3rd, 1990, we did the second CDC action. Seropositive women from around the country participated and marched to the CDC in the pouring rain. And an affinity group took over Gary Noble's office. Again, we got really good media. Then on December 14th, the first Women in HIV conference was held. The government had stacked the speakers with their mouthpieces, but 95% of the attendees were women. Seropositive women, researchers, service providers, activists, and we handed out the first National Women's Committee's Women's Research and Treatment Agenda. We just had a little work to do in between all these actions. And then we did an action at James Curran's presentation. But it was the action at a panel with Dan Hoth and Tony Fauci that had impact. Fauci said he knew nothing about treatments for women, so he started giving an AIDS 101 talk. A group of seropositive women took over the floor microphone. One started by saying, I don't have a degree in anything but streetology, but I know more about HIV than you do. Then the women made 3 demands: change the CDC definition, put women in clinical trials, and give us disability benefits. Nearly every one of the 1,500 people in that auditorium responded to their request to stand in support of the demands. And many also walked up to the stage and gave a signed unity statement to Hoth and Fauci. But it would take 2 more years to change the definition. These were focused on getting the word out to diverse communities and groups to put pressure on the CDC. We spoke in as many venues as possible. We developed a list of AIDS service providers and local organizations around the country, including ACT UPs, and started an endorsement campaign. We asked them to endorse our demands, to do actions at local and regional CDC offices or when someone from the CDC showed up in their town, and to contact their local legislators. We sent out sample letters, reports, and transcripts of all of our meetings with government officials and alerted them to changes the CDC was going to make that were not acceptable. As a result, for example, James Curran was zapped in Shreveport, Louisiana. and Ted Weiss held a hearing in the House of Representatives. And local community boards in New York passed resolutions and sent them to the CDC. Deborah Glick got the New York State Assembly to pass one and sent it to other progressive legislators all around the country who did the same. And in New York, we did one action at the CDC office in Federal Plaza. In June 1991, we handed out the research and treatment agenda at the International Conference in Florence, Italy. Also in June, we placed a full-page ad in New York using the slogan developed by Grand Fury, "Women don't get AIDS, they just die from it." My daughter is going to show you that as well. It was signed by 300 groups from around the country, 300 very diverse groups from around the country. During the remainder of 1991 and 92, the CDC tried 4 times to put out an unacceptable definition. We used our network each time to send letters, postcards, and make public comment, and stop them cold. We also asked them to write to their senators and representatives and demand an investigation of the CDC and a public hearing. Finally, at the Amsterdam Conference, International Conference in July 1992, James Curran was confronted by women from all over the world, since the World Health Organization used the CDC definition in their work, and we had sent our work all over the world. He admitted he got 12,000 letters and postcards about adding the symptoms, more than the CDC had ever gotten. And he said he would speak to us when he got back to arrange a hearing. I'm missing that page. Okay. I can wing it. What? Is it there? Oh, okay. Okay. When we finally got him to agree to the hearing, which took a while, he tried to stack it with government people who would toe his line. So we contacted our network of endorsers again. They started pressuring him, and he finally agreed to invite the researchers who had the real information, and then Linda Meredith and Mary Lucy also spoke. When the conference ended, James Curran came out and was confronted with our press conference. He told the media he had been convinced and would be adding 3 symptoms: pulmonary tuberculosis, invasive cancer of the cervix, and recurrent bacterial pneumonia. In November 1992, the CDC announced the change. Katrina was in the hospital again with bacterial pneumonia. On November 15th, she was interviewed by a reporter from the New York Times who asked her what she thought about the CDC changing the definition of AIDS. She responded, "They didn't do it, we did." Katrina died on December 2nd, 1992, without an AIDS diagnosis. If she had lived until January, she would have had one. And most of the women who participated in these actions died before antiretroviral therapy arrived on the scene. To conclude, this type of campaign, organizing, not advocating, being focused, persevering, and vigilant, creating and disseminating as much information as possible, building relationships with different types of groups and people, using every tactic available and not just relying on civil disobedience, doing public actions, educating the media, and getting the media to cover your stuff is a model as relevant today as it was then, and can be used to make significant changes in the current situation. And make no mistake about it, the AIDS crisis is not over for women or anyone else. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Maxine. And next we have Jean Carlomusto.
So, not to be contentious, but I actually am a bit shy. And that's part of the reason why I always like being behind the camera. And so most of what I have to say today is going to be represented in a 7-minute video that I'll show in about 3 minutes. And I've tried to cover events that many of the people here today are speaking of. I just say personally, I come out of gay men's health crisis, where I started volunteering in 1986. And I was very touched by the caring and the compassion I experienced there, and the camaraderie. But I really, what I was looking for was a way to express anger and a way for direct political action. And I was looking for a way to connect with women, because it didn't seem like there were very many women at GMHC in 1986 when I was there. So when ACT UP started, it just seemed like a great place to be because people were really trying to direct their anger. And coming to ACT UP in 1987, you, as a woman, I was looking for the other women in the room, gravitated towards Maxine and Maria Magenti and the people who were there. And I just want to say that for many of us who were coming in, the strays who were coming into ACT UP, for me personally, I will say Maxine was the glue. She was the person who was saying, you know, well, why don't you come to this dyke dinner we're having? And just kind of creating a forum for all of us. So, I see her doing this to this day with what she does with the Dyke March every year, and I think it's very important to show that kind of leadership. The first piece you'll see up in this video is, and Jason, I really am gonna be 3 minutes. The first piece you're going to see is a snippet from the Cosmo demonstration. Cosmo really gave us a sense. It was the first time the women came together to organize something, and it really gave us a chance to see what our possibilities were. And the most beautiful thing was the men really were there for us, and we really found a united front.
The thing to know is that we weren't even a women's committee until the organizing of this demonstration. Originally, in the very beginning, we were a bunch of lesbians who had these dyke dinners, and we would sit around trying to figure out why we were involved with AIDS activism at all. The women's committee started with a group of 5 or 6 women, and when the Cosmo organizing started, all of a sudden, all these great women, both gay and straight, were there doing everything that needed to be done.
You know, we'd go up, we'd say that we wanted to go inside, we'd get pushed away by the goons from the Cosmo Hop, and then we would like go right back and say, you know, we'd like to get in to make an appointment, and then the police would come over and they'd say, you're blocking the door.
He said we were blocking the door. We told him no, the goons were blocking the door, and if they would get out of the way, we would get into the building. And every time that the police would try to confront us that we were doing something illegal, we would tell them we weren't, and we would take their badge numbers down. And they were getting really, really antsy. And I started taking his badge number again. He got so furious, he started yelling at me, "This is the 4th time today you have taken my number." And I said, I know, we just have to know it. Each thing that you do, we have to document it. But then he really got pissed, and he started really pushing on us very, very hard.
The second piece that's going to come up is about Diva TV, damned interfering video activists. And so besides being a dyke, I was a media activist and came to ACT UP, and there are all these really fabulous media activists. And so the next piece you'll see has basically our mission statement, and then a piece that was really inspired by Ray Navarro, who is the son of Patricia Navarro. And if anyone who knew Ray and who participated in Diva TV knows that Ray was really a key figure for all of us. And his portrayal of Jesus Christ, I think, is the best.
Very authentic. I haven't seen a single Diva member yet. Well, you can be Jesus. We can be Jesus with you. Should we put the sign on the mic? If you want. Yeah. Hold on a second, Gene. Yeah, let's do some quick interviews.
I figured out I'm not on, and now I am.
I'm Jesus Christ, I'm pro-choice, I support a woman's right to choose, and I am absolutely in favor of condom use. I think that all gay and lesbian Catholic teenagers should be taught about how to have more and healthier safe sex.
some clips that Maxine's already made reference to. One of them is the first CDC action in Atlanta. And you'll see first the night before when we were watching the television from the sodomy demonstration, and then the next day a little snippet of what the actual demonstration looked like. And following that, and finally, the HHS action, the Health and Human Service action, where you'll see Phyllis Sharp, you'll see Iris Dela Cruz, who both speak. You'll see Katrina. And I think this was just an important event for all of us there because we all came together around women's issues.
This afternoon, hundreds of members of Atlanta's gay community staged a raucous protest on the steps of the Capitol. They were there to protest Georgia's sodomy laws, which restrict sexual behavior between even consenting adults.
SSA, can't you see? Women need disability. I'm Phyllis Sharp from New York. I'm also a plaintiff in this lawsuit against the Social Security charging them with discrimination against women. I applied April 1989. I couldn't work. I constantly have urinary tract infections, yeast, chronic fatigue, and I was denied. I appealed January 90. I'm still waiting for a decision a year and a half up to now. To have diarrhea, infection, shortness of breath, I can't work. They won't recognize this as a disability. I am not receiving benefits, and it's hard to take care of my children, myself, and my child who is HIV positive and eat with a correct diet. I wish I could do I know I could do these things if they would give me my benefits. It's time they change the definition and stop killing women, denying them of their disability. Thank you.
How many women have to die before you say they qualify? How many women have to die before you say they qualify?
My name is Iris Dela Cruz. I'm a 37-year-old woman with AIDS. 5 weeks ago, I had a full hysterectomy due to ovarian abscesses due to PID. 7 years ago, I was hospitalized with pelvic inflammatory disease. I was an active IV drug user, and no one ever thought to test me for HIV, which is no good thing because there was no treatment then. Even today, there is no treatment. A woman